The next principle of religiosity is truthfulness. This can basically be divided into being truthful with others and the all-important honesty with oneself. There is factually nowhere to hide from the all-powerful Lord. Being the source of all other eternal spiritual beings, the Supreme Lord can understand our hearts even more efficiently than we can understand our own motivations. This is significant because of this intimate connection between the Lord and the eternal living entities. There is simply no one more capable of being a confidential friend to us than the Lord. The Lord is very fond of all living entities, regardless of how they happen to be situated, on account of the temporary material desires that have become manifest within the heart. Therefore the Lord personally spoke the Bhagavad Gita, which actually translates into the Song of God, for the benefit of all embodied living entities in this world of matter. Within the Bhagavad Gita lies the formula for escaping all material miseries. This process of liberation is being professed by the Lord because he is very interested in the ultimate welfare of all living entities situated in this material realm. Therefore, being honest with oneself is essential in reestablishing this eternal relationship with the Lord that now lies dormant due to material contact. This text has been rooted in some rather confidential information. There's another bit of knowledge that is essential to understand. There is actually a battle taking place within all of us. This translates into larger scale turmoil on a cosmic level. So there needs to be some diligence in taking the self-inventory needed to factually be honest with oneself. There is a side within all of us that would prefer to remain untruthful due to this duality within us. So this is defined as the higher and lower self. There is always a competition between these two aspects of us. With proper understanding and the association of firm faith, one can, for a lack of a better term, intimidate the lower self into submitting to the dictation of the higher self, because ultimately the higher self, being situated in the mode of goodness, is correct in observing the world, while the lower self simply cannot find the strength to ascend out of the lower qualities of existence, such as laziness and envy. This whole scenario of duality makes being honest with oneself more difficult than it initially appears. So being honest with oneself begins with accepting the appropriate spiritual guidance. This can actually be very difficult. There are countless individuals guised as spiritual leaders that are not being completely honest with themselves due to the stated duality of the lower and higher self. Many pose as religious leaders while simultaneously remain unable to break free from the desire to be honored by others. At the end of the day, if they were truthful with themselves, the desire to be aggrandized by others would be their core motivation for religious activities. So this battle within us is always there. Therefore, one must be honest with oneself about why one desires to perform spiritually motivated activities. Why does one desire to cultivate spiritual understanding? Escaping all material miseries can be designated as a reason for cultivating spiritual understanding. However, simply wanting to become free from distress will not do. One must desire to reestablish the intimate bond that naturally exists between oneself and the blissful Lord. This is the proper motivation for cultivating spiritual understanding. This should be taken into consideration with full honesty. Reason being is that there will likely be a great deal of distress to be endured in reestablishing this eternal bond with the Lord. There will likely be many tests of one's sincerity. If one simply wants to be honored as a great religious personality, one's progress towards pure devotional service to the Lord will be checked. This intimate connection with the Lord through the agency of unmotivated service is where one's happiness rests. There may be so much dishonor and strife to be endured in order to attain pure devotion to the Lord. Those who are not thoroughly sincere in this endeavor fall to the wayside in their march towards the Lord. However, the one distinct benefit of becoming the Lord's devotee is that even if one is unsuccessful in attaining the Lord, ultimately, after much endeavor, a devotee will attain the Lord without a doubt. This is a special characteristic of devotional service to the Lord. It always resolves in success. So taking shelter of proper guidance, one should arm oneself with purified intelligence and not fall victim to the propensities of the lower self. This is the definition of being truthful with oneself. Now perhaps one is still situated as strongly desiring recognition and honor in spiritual life. One should not be discouraged. In the business of learning any fine art, there will be much trial and error involved. There simply needs to be persistence paired with firm faith in the process as a whole. After much endeavor, the faithful person will advance. This is guaranteed as long as one remains truthful. For the faithful person, the individual that can be honest with oneself, success is assured. This success may be realized very slowly, however, it will materialize from truthfulness. In the matter of being truthful with all others, There is factually no injustice that goes unaccounted for. This is a reality on so many levels. If one is not truthful in one's dealings with others, it will be very difficult to make spiritual progress. The most prominent reason for this is that if one takes this process of freedom from material association very seriously, there will likely be so much resistance. Every action one performs is being witnessed by many. This may seem unrealistic. However, as I've been illustrating this entire text, there is an element existing outside the jurisdiction of our introspection. This influence is taking shape upon the mental plane. If one is deceitful, this element will use such actions to persecute you in an attempt to sway you from the path. Certainly, all dishonesty will be used to defame you. It is very similar to common political dealings. It is certainly so that the president is not free to act carelessly. Such actions will result in being torn down from office. In the same way, one who desires to attain the service of the Lord must be pure in all dealings. If not, such actions will certainly result in infamy. So there should be great attention given to how one deals with all others in all manners. The Lord frankly states that one should be prepared to offer all respect to others while expecting none in return. Obviously, it is disrespectful to steal and cheat others. Therefore, such activity should be abandoned. Now it is a fact that there may be mistakes, and one may commit some activity that could be considered deceitful. If one is sincerely engaged in the Lord's service, such minor infractions in truthfulness are excused. However, one must use their common sense and not take advantage of this pardon from the Lord. Therefore, one should always remain attentive in how one acts in regards to all one's dealings with others. One should understand this thoroughly. No one is perfect in this world. There is certainly an element in our field of activities that strongly desires everyone remain enslaved in material existence. This lends to their malicious motivations. This element will make an attempt to persecute you for any reason, regardless of how petty. This is all frivolous nonsense. The devotee of the Lord is not obliged to any living entity in this world, being under the direct command of the real Supreme Lord. The undesirables would naturally prefer to focus on every fault in all others. In this way, they are never required to take an honest inventory of themselves. Now, there should be some discretion in all one's activities, including one's labor to earn a livelihood. This can be complicated because currently nature's laws and the state's laws hardly run parallel with each other. So one should properly understand what constitutes forbidden activity. This should be learned from the devotee of the Lord. Otherwise, if one takes guidance on such restrictions from another source, one will be misguided. Therefore, in order to remain truthful, one must separate oneself from forbidden activity, even in the matter of employment. Meat eating and intoxication are certainly discouraged for one who desires to advance in spiritual understanding. Therefore, it is considered untruthful to participate in the promotion of such activities in one's labor to maintain oneself. So basically, one should disassociate oneself from selling meat especially. This is strongly recommended. Better if one is not serving alcohol or other intoxicants to the public. In this way, one will not run the risk of having their truthfulness compromised in their pursuit to maintain the body. It can certainly be defined as difficult to separate oneself from such activity, especially if one is dependent upon such activity to provide the necessities of life. However, with a bit of determination and cleverness, one can arrange to perform some other activity for one's livelihood. This is essential. The current situation we all find ourselves can easily be defined as a difficult test. Therefore, there should be some diligence in passing such tests. In this way, one will advance towards the pure devotional service of the blissful Lord. This is an appropriate way to meter one's sincerity. If one is not very serious about attaining the Lord, there will be hesitation. For one who is serious about advancing, the required determination will exist to achieve such a perfect goal as the Lord's loving service. The activities of gambling and mental speculation destroy the pillar of religiosity defined as truthfulness. Gambling is a complicated topic because disregarding one's own welfare and taking to unauthorized forbidden activities is a form of gambling. One is taking a great risk by throwing caution to the wind and acting without regulative principles. This leads to mental speculation, which we can all understand from practical experience is simply endless. Once one disregards the orders of the spiritual master and flips a coin in the matter of one's spiritual welfare, one is enthusiastically opening Pandora's box to a great deal of distress and misfortune. There are no guarantees in the endeavors of those who live outside the jurisdiction of the Lord's grace. All can take a turn for the worst with little warning. These undesirable results are just a glimpse into the negative effects of gambling and mental speculation. In the matter of literally engaging in games of chance in order to attain wealth, such activities simply can have no standing in the sphere of an aspiring transcendentalist's activities. It completely goes against the grain for a devotee to engage in such activities. There is simply no end to the feverish desires that arise from gambling. Obviously, such activity is completely opposed to the pursuit of spiritual realization and should be thoroughly abandoned. The unsteady mind may present the rationality that such gambling is for the benefit of spiritual growth, because the profits will be engaged in good works, such as building temples and other philanthropic activity. This is a manifestation of the deceptive nature of the fickle mind. Such activities are by no means endorsed by the Lord. Gambling will lead one away from the absolute truth without exception. Therefore, such frivolous activities should be accepted for what they are, nonsense. So it is always important to remain truthful in all one's activities. Without factually perceiving the complete design of our current field of action, it may be difficult to tightly grasp the following information. Regardless, the reality is as follows. All attempts to commit acts considered deceitful shall meet with consequence. There is simply no way to be deceitful without meeting with repercussions. This is the reality of the matter on so many different platforms. Therefore, it is in one's own best interest to always remain truthful in all one's dealings. The last pillar of remaining righteous and religious is austerity. There must be austerity incorporated in one's pursuit of spiritual understanding. It is common for individuals to ultimately be situated as sympathetic to the idea of spiritual growth. One may, with great enthusiasm, even accept some spiritual process for attaining the absolute truth. However, the concept of austerity is misunderstood, therefore it is neglected. The definition of austerity in regards to spiritual realization is to voluntarily accept some inconvenience for the benefit of achieving the loving service of the Lord. This is ultimately essential in the entire process of spiritual understanding. Now, as stated, the capacity for modern man to perform austerity has become very meek in comparison to the great spiritual personalities of the past. Therefore, the regulations for demonstrating penance have been lowered significantly. Some may view this regulated program I am setting forth as very stringent. In comparison to the actual regulations followed in their entirety, this plan I am setting forth is very liberal. Attaining the association of the blissful Lord is an incalculable gift. There are an inconceivably vast amount of eternal spiritual beings situated in material contact here in this realm. Some of them, by great fortune, come into the association of the process for understanding the absolute truth and the devotional service of the Lord. There are other processes for attaining the Lord. However, none are as simple and relishing as this process available to all of us right now. Therefore, such regulations should be adopted without hesitation. There are some regulations in regards to austerity that can be classified as formal austerities. Take the 1-year fast from both food and water on Nirjala Ekadasi, for instance. This can be identified as a formal austerity. There is another type of austerity that is much more intimate. This involves fasting from foodstuffs to commemorate significant dates in regards to the Lord's activities. Some of the prominent devotees of the Lord, especially one's direct spiritual masters, are also celebrated by accepting some inconvenience, such as fasting. I will make my greatest attempt to illustrate these intimate characteristics of the Lord's service in the following chapter. In the matter of performing austerity, such activities should be strongly rooted in the loving service of the Lord. These austerities of mind and body will be beneficial. There are certainly many formulas for performing different types of penance to gain some material benefit, such as wealth, health, etc. Some of these ritualistic activities can be identified as traditions or customs and vary greatly. In the ultimate reality of the situation, these customary practices stem from very complicated sacrificial rituals that simply are not realistic for this day and age. One executing such activities may feel some happiness from the completion of the penance itself. This is the only real benefit of such activity. Real austerity involves demonstrating one's desire to advance in the Lord's service. These activities will always result in benefit and are strongly encouraged. The idea of austerity, accepting some penance to demonstrate one's sincerity, is essential in making spiritual advancement, headed far away from all material miseries. The Lord is certainly not a trinket to be worn as a decoration around the neck. There is a vast difference between the consciousness of one who understands this and one who does not. Generally, people approach the worship of the Lord similar to everything else, a means for gaining some material benefit. There is no harm in this in the beginning. Better they approach the Lord in this way than not at all. Some officially make their visit to the church or temple to offer their respects to the Lord. Such activity is certainly very good. There is, however, a higher tier of spiritual understanding to be had by one who takes the seriousness of this process to heart. This elevated conception of spiritual life is to be had by one who thoroughly hears the message of the spiritual masters. This message is fundamentally that we are not in our natural condition here in this world of repeated birth and death. Our real happiness, our natural situation, rests elsewhere. It rests in the reality that exists in harmony with the service of the blissful Lord. So one should be ready to accept some inconvenience by the performance of penance to regain this perfect state of consciousness. This entire field of activity we now find ourselves can be classified as a severe austerity. If one desires to seriously advance in spiritual life, one must give up nearly all common associations. There must be discrimination executed in nearly every sphere of one's activities. So many restrictions must be implemented. This all may seem like a great austerity. In a sense, these restrictions are austerities. However, such restrictions will situate one as very strong in mind and determination. Therefore, these restrictions are austerities and simultaneously not austerities. As stated earlier, there is a universal currency that exists and rests on one's performance of spiritually motivated penance. One should develop a great desire to attain this currency. One should want it in the same way a banker desires money. So I'd like to identify a few austerities which may not be completely obvious. I will explain the logic behind performing such penance. The benefit of these austerities can directly be perceived through their execution. Therefore, I encourage you to, at the least, experiment by accepting these minor inconveniences temporarily to start. The first austerity I would like to illustrate is rising at dawn. Now, as I have explained, there's a separate realm of consciousness and activity existing on the mental level. In general, most have no experience of this realm. However, the activities one is accustomed to engage in here in this gross realm of consciousness have a direct effect on how one is situated in this other realm. So in relation to all this, if one is not awake, engaged in the Lord's service at dawn, one will be engaged in another way, sound asleep, while the mind roams the ethereal realm. This is not at all good. As I stated in chapter 3, if one does not recognize the Lord and engage in his service, one will be forced to surrender elsewhere. Basically, we are going to serve someone. Whether this is service to the Lord in transcendental knowledge or service to some other personality with a foundation rooted in fear is up to us according to our activities. So the significance of what one is engaged in at dawn has a direct link to the decision one has made in accordance with one who has surrendered to. Therefore, one should be awake and preparing to engage the tongue in prayer to the real Lord at the beginning of dawn. This official beginning of dawn is generally announced by a significant trumpet-like song by a bird or a rooster crow. This is the beginning of dawn. When one hears this sound, one should refrain from returning to sleep. Some places there is no such song. In such a case, usually at first light, one should be ready to rise from sleep. This is an essential austerity that should be performed by one who desires to become a candidate for liberation from the shackles of death. It is quite simple. Just arrange your life in such a manner that you will be ready to rise at the beginning of dawn to engage in the Lord's loving service through prayer. Now I'm going to reveal to you some confidential information that should be taken into consideration. This involves how one is engaged during the celebration of Halloween and All Saints' Day. The custom is to very heavily engage in intoxication the night of Halloween, so if one does this, it is nearly certain that one will miss the following dawn the next day. One will certainly not be in any state of mind to offer service to the Lord at dawn. Therefore, one is factually being deceived into signing on to the motivations of the undesirables by ceremoniously missing the special dawn on All Saints' Day by engaging in heavy intoxication the night of Halloween. This can be defined as ritualistically missing the rising of the sun to demonstrate one's commitment to darkness. This, again, is all complete nonsense initiated by those that believe they can vote their way into how the world shall function. Perhaps such a fantasy may be perpetuated for some time. Similar to any other dream, a conclusion must materialize to such a fairy tale. However, while the fraud is being perpetuated, one should understand how their welfare is affected by it. Therefore, one should make it a specific point to never miss this dawn after Halloween. In this way, one will be thwarting the malicious motivations of the undesirables. It may be difficult, regardless. One interested in their own spiritual welfare should refrain from any nonsense intoxication upon the night of Halloween and be ready to engage in spiritual activities in relation to the Lord's service, the dawn of All Saints' Day. This is ultimately essential. To further display one's desire to be disassociated from the rascals, one should refrain from eating anything till the sunset of All Saints' Day. This will be beneficial. I have to humbly request that you just take this last bit of advice on faith. I could explain it in its entirety. However, it would not be appropriate to do so in a public forum. The next austerity I would like to illustrate is the careful regulation of consuming foodstuffs. Even one who is regularly eating sanctified food that has been offered in loving service to the Lord should be regulated in how one goes about consuming food. As stated earlier, I personally fast till at least 4:30 p.m. every day. There is no scriptural significance to the exact time I have chosen. It is a personal standard I have set for myself. It is an austerity, yet not unrealistic. In this way, I can practice some regulation without great suffering. This is going to be very beneficial, especially for those that struggle from being overweight. If one fasts till 4:30 p.m. daily, one will not have to very closely meter the richness of their food. It will be very difficult to overeat if one practices this simple austerity. Therefore, one will not become lazy in other endeavors in life. Pair this fasting with an hour walk at dawn, and one's general condition is going to improve very quickly. Perhaps 4:30 p.m. may seem a bit of a severe austerity in the beginning. Fasting certainly becomes easier as you do it. Begin by fasting till noon to start. Once you begin this regulated consumption of food, you will realize the benefit and enthusiastically increase the fast till 4:30 p.m. This simple austerity is going to make controlling the other aspects of your life much easier. Therefore, I strongly recommend one, at the least, experiment with this regulation to observe the obvious benefits. I personally drink water all day to help in fasting. Now, if one is very attracted to tobacco, one can use it to regulate the consumption of food. Generally, all intoxication is refrained from. This is a general standard for one who desires liberation from material existence. So, this regulation includes tobacco to a degree. Using tobacco can be considered a form of intoxication. There is certainly no smoking or chewing tobacco in the spiritual realm. This is not a part of the Lord's transcendental activities. Therefore, ultimately, one will be required to completely give up the use of tobacco to enter into the Lord's association. Once again, this is all based on practical activity. If one desires to use tobacco more than one desires to enter the spiritual realm, one will be required to take another material form. However, if one executes these strict regulations concerning eating, one can use tobacco to assist in such penance. This means that if, through the cultivation of knowledge, one understands the necessity to completely detach oneself from all food not cooked personally and offered to the Lord in loving service, one can use tobacco to assist in this austerity. Because in reality, this is a very severe austerity if executed with full determination. The unrestricted consumption of foodstuffs, simply to satisfy the demands of the tongue, is currently the standard behavior. This carelessness is currently like a raging river during flood season for the masses throughout the entire world. Everywhere one turns, there is encouragement to act carelessly and eat whatever one desires to satisfy the palate. As I have been illustrating repeatedly, this careless behavior is ground zero for one's lack of self-control. Therefore, to assist in curbing this behavior, if one is fond of tobacco, one can accept it as a gift from the Lord to assist in controlling the tongue. This is how tobacco should be accepted. It should be accepted in the spirit of knowledge. If one researches into the use of tobacco by the Native Americans, one will find that it was accepted in this way, as a gift from the Lord. The Native Americans used tobacco to assist in fasting from food. It was also used in many other ways as a sacred ingredient in performing spiritual activities. If one is not at all fond of tobacco, there still should be strict regulation implemented in regards to what one eats, when one eats, and how much. Drinking water continuously will assist in fasting as well. If one desires, one can chew gum to help with controlling food take as well. For those who are fond of using tobacco, one should understand that by engaging in its regulated use in order to curb the demands of the tongue in this very chaotic world, one will eventually become so purified by engaging in the Lord's transcendental service that attraction for any other activity will diminish to nothing, including the use of tobacco. So therefore, you can see, tobacco use can be understood as a tool for attaining the Lord if accepted appropriately. I am personally fond of tobacco. I have, however, implemented strict regulations upon its use. I personally will not use tobacco until I have completed my 1-hour walk chanting the names of the Lord. This is my general rule of behavior. If you are fond of tobacco, I suggest you adopt similar restrictions upon yourself. This will be very pleasing to the Lord. Again, the Lord is quite aware of exactly how everyone is particularly situated. The first thing you may desire to do when you rise in the morning is to use tobacco. One should restrict oneself by first engaging in 1 hour of service by praying to the Lord, preferably by walking away from all technologies at dawn. This is a very nice austerity to please the transcendental Lord. Now, I personally have no attraction whatsoever for caffeine. However, if caffeine is what one desires, first thing in the morning, one can restrict the use of caffeine in the exact same way to satisfy the Lord. This attitude of penance will lead one away from all things not associated with the loving service of the Lord. The Lord is factually metering everyone's advancement in spiritual realization. The The all-powerful Lord can award liberation to anyone anytime he desires. Therefore, one should implement the regulations set forth by the spiritual guide to demonstrate one's desire to attain such a blissful promotion in consciousness. So it is explained in Vedic truths that intoxication destroys the pillar of religiosity defined as austerity. Giving up all major intoxication can be a staggeringly difficult goal. At least it can be for one who has become very fond of such activities. This whole system we now all find ourselves lends to feeling very dissatisfied. This is natural because all these nonsense activities of meat eating and illicit sex indulgence can never fully satisfy the eternal spiritual being. Therefore, a strong desire to escape this blatant unhappiness may certainly become manifest within the heart. The consumption of alcohol and other intoxicants can certainly be identified as a quick fix for relieving this melancholy unhappiness that may be weighing one down. However, anyone who is fond of this intoxication knows from practical experience this unhappiness comes on even more relentless after the fact. It is a vicious cycle that, in reality, is a desire of hopeless self-destruction that has taken root. So, once again, this system we now all find ourselves has been designed to encourage this self-destruction. It lends to the broad goals of those who have no interest in our well-being. Therefore, one must become convinced of all this. When one becomes well acquainted with the ins and outs of all this negativity, one should feel enlivened to refuse to participate in it. This will be very beneficial to one's welfare on so many different levels. One has to develop some desire to attain the Lord. By developing this attitude, when one engages in the service of the Lord, one will become enlivened by the satisfaction that is naturally situated in devotional service to the blissful Lord. Then one will be able to brush aside the self-destructive mentality that leads to the embrace of intoxication, such as alcohol and drug use. I have learned from practical experience that this overwhelming desire to punish myself was strongly rooted in taking part in this negative system readily available to all of us in our current field of activities. I did not understand how I was being influenced. Therefore, I regularly participated in this system, eating whatever I desired according to the whims of my uncontrolled mind. This made me susceptible to being deceived and influenced on so many different platforms. Once I disassociated myself from eating foodstuffs not offered to the Lord, I had the realization that the source of my overwhelming depression that resulted in intoxication vanished. Therefore, my conclusion is that by submitting to the desires of those that wish to destroy me, I was creating my own complexity, the result being complete bewilderment. It is very important for one who desires to utilize their life to attain spiritual salvation to refrain from intoxication. As illustrated, one wanting to advance in spiritual understanding should only consume foodstuffs offered to the Supreme Lord in loving devotion. So the Lord has no desire to consume liquor or wine. Therefore, if one consumes these intoxicants, one will become contaminated in consciousness. This will lead one away from the truth, not towards it. Through the cultivation of knowledge, one should be convinced of this truth. There is actually a distinct division in the matter of cultivating knowledge. In Vedic terms, this contrast in understanding is defined as Gyan and Vigyan. This translates into the distinction between book knowledge and realized knowledge. Gyan is defined as book knowledge, Vigyan as realized knowledge. This division in understanding should be distinguished appropriately. One can, without cessation, read and study scriptural knowledge without ever coming to a complete understanding of such information. This is on account of not thoroughly accepting and implementing the orders of the spiritual master. The skimming the surface of realization can go on without end if the proper attitude of humility and service are missing. Therefore, one should thoroughly understand this. One must develop faith in the goodwill of the spiritual masters. These souls are the friends of all living entities and have prescribed a path to follow out of love. Nothing is prescribed by the spiritual master that is not rooted in compassion and genuine care. By following the orders of the spiritual guide, one will not only cultivate knowledge from an academic standpoint, one will factually realize such information. There is a vast difference between the two understandings. In the next chapter, I shall illustrate the lives of the most prominent spiritual masters that are responsible for delivering the philosophy in this text to the Western world. Moving on, there are ways to satisfy this urge to experience intoxication that are not averse to making advancement in spiritual understanding. Personally, when I have had an overwhelming day and I would like to escape from a troubled mind, I will prepare a very nice fruit drink that is very sweet and delicious, usually a very delicious lemonade. However, there are no restrictions on what kind of fruit drink you can prepare. I will then offer it in loving service to the Lord. After it has been offered to the Lord, one can sumptuously partake in drinking it. Drink as much of it as you want. This will help ease the mind, and unlike drinking alcohol, one will become purified by drinking it. This is a proper way to curb desires to get drunk on alcohol. So once again, spiritual advancement involves dovetailing activities according to the pleasures of the transcendental Lord's senses. I will discuss this much more thoroughly in the next chapter. One must become satisfied with things that make the Lord pleased. This is understood through the channel of the spiritual masters. Acting in the spirit of knowledge will be very beneficial for one so engaged, and one will advance towards the Lord, not away from him. In the matter of consuming all other intoxicants besides alcohol, these adulterants are actually different poisonous ingredients. Again, the use of such intoxicants are embraced due to ill association. If such association was not present, there would be no desires for such things. Now, generally, one could give up these negative demands of the mind by associating with those with positive spiritual desires situated in the core of their hearts. Unfortunately, I cannot really recommend such an association currently. This is why I have chosen to have no formal association in my current field of activities. Now, when Prabhupada was present, he created a nice society which promoted pure living in agreement with the untainted devotional service of the Lord. Consequently, individuals regularly joined his society suffering from grave addictions and completely conquered such ailments. This was accomplished with little difficulty. Such a society is not readily available right now due to certain philosophical deviations that have been embraced within his former society. Therefore, I cannot currently recommend joining any society practicing the Vedic principles of Krishna consciousness. However, armed with firm faith, one can adopt the methods of self-control that I have prescribed and conquer any imposition currently burdening the mind. There is every possibility of becoming liberated, at least progressing in this direction, by following the regulative principles of knowledge. It certainly would be easier to accomplish this in a large society where all embrace this common goal. However, it is more important to practice the principles of spiritual understanding and separation from all deviations. It may be hard to conceptualize, however, all deviations materialize due to the nefarious activities of those with ill intent. As described, there is an element that will very enthusiastically travel any avenue towards the disruption of the Lord's service. Such loving service demonstrated to the real Lord does not mix well with their ideas. So once this element makes its way through the front door of righteous service directed towards the Lord, the system sadly must be rejected by anyone desiring to please the Lord. What is the point of engaging in such activities if they are not pleasing to the Lord? There is no point in becoming engaged in this way in reality. Moving on, there is every chance of becoming fully liberated if one develops faith in the Lord's service and fully executes the regulative principles of religiosity. This may seem difficult to accomplish without ample positive association. However, it is certainly possible if things are understood appropriately. When I first came into the association of this knowledge through the channel of the Lord's engaged devotees, the Lord was very kind to me. I was given a wonderful, encouraging taste for the Lord's service. Therefore, perhaps it may be a bit less painful giving up material association because I am very convinced about the benefits of devotional service to the Lord. If you become very enthusiastic about this path of the Lord's service, perhaps the Lord shall give you a wonderful taste for service as well. I am not the Supreme Lord, therefore I cannot determine the exact motivations of the Blessed Lord. In fact, the special qualification of the Lord is that there is no one that exists that can factually understand the activities of the Lord in total. We can understand the activities of the Lord according to what the Lord desires to reveal to us through the medium of the spiritual masters and revealed scriptures. There is every chance that the Lord may be very kind to you if you take up this path with all seriousness and sincerity. In general, the Lord's system is that one shall advance very quickly by executing the orders of the spiritual masters. So in this chapter, I am making my most honest attempt at describing these orders. I've certainly made some adjustments according to time and circumstance. The main principles of action professed by my spiritual authorities have been presented in their entirety. I am certain some will criticize me for allowing the use of tobacco and caffeine. However, if one does the research, one will find that Prabhupada also made very liberal allowances in the beginning. This program is to help people begin the process of service to the Lord. So this is a liberty I have installed, the regulated use of tobacco and caffeine. I have stressed using these two items as a form of austerity. You may want to use one or both of these items first thing and without any restrictions. So restrict them for the benefit of making spiritual advancement. This will lead one towards the Lord. Some things, such as illicit sex indulgence and meat eating, can have no standing in the embrace of the Lord's service. There simply can be no compromise in these matters. Neither can one who disregards the restrictions on meat eating and illicit sex indulgence attain the supreme goal. Due to a declining observance of such regulations, mental speculation becomes prominent. Some engaged in the Lord's service purchase meals from restaurants that serve meat and then make mock offerings of such things to the Lord. This is because a doubt about whether the Lord can accept things at all has taken root within the heart. The Lord does not desire to accept anything that is not, at the least, striving towards the loving attitude of those situated in the spiritual realm. The liberated souls in the association of the Lord would never dream of offering such contaminated things to the Lord. Therefore, if one does make such an unfit offering to the Lord, one is directly demonstrating their doubt about the Lord, about the entire process of devotional service, in fact. Such activities should be abandoned by those with a desire to advance towards the Lord. By the cultivation of real knowledge, one must at the least desire to abandon, without exception, all lusty propensities involving illicit sex indulgence. This is accomplished through the execution of spiritually motivated activities. The Lord is very adamant about this. There can be no compromise. In the beginning, due to circumstances, may be very difficult. Generally, the standard is that one making spiritually motivated loving offerings to the Lord be free from embracing lusty desires for illicit sex indulgence. This is the standard and illustrates just how unclean illicit sex indulgence is situated. However, it is just as important to only consume foodstuffs that have been offered to the Lord in devotion. Nothing else is actually suitable for consumption by one striving for freedom from the shackles of death. At the least, this weakness of heart to enjoy illicit sex should honestly be identified, and one should sincerely pray to the Lord to remove such undesirable tendencies from the heart. I would say that if one can understand the grave importance of not consuming anything other than food that has been offered to the Lord, yet still desires illicit sex, better to offer all one consumes as food to the Lord and sincerely pray to the Lord for advancement in consciousness. By only consuming the remnants of foodstuffs offered to the Lord, one will quickly become purified from the ill desires of illicit sex indulgence. The desire may still be present within the heart. However, one will become purified enough to resist blatantly embracing such impurities if one takes this process up with all seriousness. The definition of blatantly embracing desires to enjoy illicit sex can be defined as not restricting oneself from contemplating sex enjoyment upon seeing a desirable person, engaging in manual stimulation, and engaging in sexual intercourse not meant to produce a child. The tricky one is not contemplating sex when a desirable person is present. If you do not thoroughly restrict this activity, the other two actions are inevitable. Therefore, one who desires to attain the Lord should be very careful in these matters. It is clear to see that there is a war going on in relation to controlling the mind and senses. Through faith and perseverance, one becomes a mighty warrior in this battle. So the Lord identifies the nature of this war and the identity of the enemy vividly in the Bhagavad Gita. The Lord describes the enemy as lust. Now there is certainly the suggestion of such a personality as Satan here, that there is a predominating deity governing over this weakness of heart that results in rebellion towards the Lord's service. However, this lust should be more accurately understood as a symbol of sin, a symbol of rebellion towards the Lord's service. Because, similar to any other position held within this material world, there are always changes taking place. There may be a person who is holding the post of a sinister deceiver that is set on deviating all others from the path of righteousness. This is simply a position given by the Lord. Similar to any other position in this world, it is a temporary post, but the idea of lust is different than one personality, because the person may change. In fact, such a change is certain. The reason for the post is what is important. This reason has everything to do with why we are here in this material realm. It has to do with why we cannot leave this realm of sorrow. This reason can be identified as an impurity that has veiled the real transcendental knowledge that currently lies dormant within all of us. There are predominating deities of every function within the material body, as well as personalities governing all other aspects of this material manifestation. It can certainly be difficult to conceptualize such a situation. This is the reality regardless of our inability to perceive things taking place in such a manner. So the Lord explains in the Bhagavad Gita that this deity of sin, lust, has captured strategic positions within the machine of the material body possessed by every living entity in this world. It is certainly hard to envision the position of such a personality. It seems fantastic that a living entity can enter into the sphere of the field of activities of others in such a vast way. However, once again, the Lord is the powerhouse of all such opulence and gives and takes away such opulence at his discretion. The Lord explains in the Bhagavad Gita that this lust has captured and entered into the sphere of the senses, mind, and intelligence of every living entity situated within this material world. This can be perceived if one becomes very sensitive to the situation. The feverish burning that takes place within the mind and senses to act without restrictions. This is lust. The voice within that seems to relentlessly debate with us about choices made in regards to action. Again, this is lust. So, if one understands this thoroughly, how this situation is materializing, one can become situated as detached from the entire scenario. This can be identified as becoming experienced on account of proper understanding. How does one attain such a position? This detachment is attained through the satisfaction of the Lord. The Lord is factually the overseer of the entire situation. By the Lord's satisfaction and mercy, one becomes transcendental to the dictation of lust. So, the Lord summarizes this entire situation of inner turmoil quite frankly in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 41. Therefore, Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. In this verse, the Lord is declaring that there must be an affirmative action taken to remove the great obstacle in the process of spiritual understanding, identified as lust. This action should be executed immediately before anything else is executed, from the very beginning. What is the foundation for such action? The foundation for such an endeavor involves a systematic regulation of the senses, metering how the senses are engaged in their various objects of attraction. The Lord does not say give up all activities involving the senses and their objects of engagement. One must regulate such activities. One may become frustrated with all material endeavors and decide to put an end to all activity by engaging in deep meditation to end all material suffering. The Lord does not necessarily prescribe such a formula for self-realization. One must eat food to live. Therefore, it is not advised that one quit eating food. It is advised to eat in a regulated manner that is conducive to spiritual advancement. This involves finding out what the Lord desires to consume as foodstuffs, preparing such edibles very nicely for the Lord's satisfaction, and then accepting such edibles as the Lord's mercy. So the process of eating is conducted in a regulated manner. There must be some endeavor to maintain the body. Such work should be performed in a regulated way, and the Lord should enjoy the fruits of such labor. This means that if one is situated that they must work very hard to maintain house and children, the Lord should be the enjoyer of such work by raising children that understand the loving service of the blissful Lord. This is the definition of regulating the senses. The Lord never suggests that a practical man abolish activities and retreat to seclusion to meditate. Material miseries can be described as an infliction, an ailment resulting in distress. The appropriate doctor will issue a prescription to relieve one's suffering so. The Lord's practical prescription for ending all material miseries is to regulate the senses very diligently to conquer the enemy of lust. In this chapter, I have systematically illustrated the proper regulation in regards to our particular situation as modern humans living in these very trying times. These are the regulative principles as I have understood them from my spiritual authorities. This regulated activity, paired with a determination to reestablish one's relationship with the Lord, will result in success in spiritual life and the end of all material suffering. In the closing of this chapter, there must be a strong discrimination in the matter of how one acts. You may look around and see very beautiful people, engaged with one another very joyously. They are eating at fine restaurants, drinking wine, and laughing carelessly with each other. The idea may come to mind that they are enjoying very nicely. Why shall I regulate the mind and senses with so many restrictions? The thought may manifest that there is no need to undergo so much trouble. Better I just work very hard to attain a similar joyous condition. The material atmosphere is arranged in such a deceiving manner. This can be identified as a test in one's sincerity. This envy of others is becoming manifest within the heart due to an impurity that has taken root there. This envy of others is a mirrored reflection of our envy of the Supreme Lord. So this jealousy is present within all of us. Ultimately, there is never any complete satisfaction to be attained by those materially engaged, because there is always some higher tier of enjoyment to strive to attain, possessed by another, which ultimately culminates in the status possessed by the blissful Lord, which is a position that shall never be attained. In regards to the opulence currently being displayed by humans on this planet, one should not be fooled into understanding these qualifications to be the all in all. There is currently a great contrast being exhibited in the possession of material opulence. Many have little to none, while others seem to be flushed with such qualities. Some seem to possess godly beauty and vast wealth, and they are very much intoxicated by such opulence, flaunting it with a certain level of arrogance. Such opulence is certainly very alluring. However, those in possession of such opulence fail to realize the reality of the situation. They are engaged similar to horses strapped with blinders upon the eyes, because, in reality, they are enjoying such opulence due to pious activities they have performed in the past. They may think that they have attained such attributes through the agency of some other process. However, this is simply not so. The nature of this world is very elusive. One may assume that everything achieved is due to one's cleverness and manipulation. However, such an idea does not take into account the higher tier of reality that rests upon the administration of the all-powerful Lord. Currently, a group of individuals on this planet are carelessly enjoying great opulence, accepting such things as the ultimate truth. They possess very little desire to understand anything other than this enjoyment. Therefore, they remain situated as reluctant to perform spiritually motivated activities. When I say spiritual activities, I am referring to real spiritual activities that involve controlling the mind and senses and the performance of spiritually motivated austerities. So this is not at all wise. Accumulated pious activities result in material opulence, such as great beauty and material wealth. These qualifications are accrued from good work performed in one's past life. So if one is careless, one will simply discharge this accumulation. It can be best illustrated as carelessly discharging a fire extinguisher as if it shall never become depleted and emptied. Well, obviously it shall eventually become depleted. So this gradual depletion of material opulence is what is taking place unpronounced to those engaged in very opulent positions in our current field of activity. They are not taking into consideration their future status, taking this one field of work as the end of all activities. This is very lamentable, because having lived such a cushioned existence situates them as the least prepared for what awaits them in the future. Again, a world full of very rude awakening. Bob Dylan illustrated it best in his song, "The Times Are Changing." The first ones now shall later be last. This sums the entire situation up perfectly. I have found that it's very difficult to approach individuals intoxicated with material opulence, such as beauty and wealth. Getting them to take into consideration their future well-being is nearly impossible. This is on account of having been misinformed about their current situation in its entirety. Once again, accepting this one life as the all-in-all. There is no channel of dialogue with those so situated. Therefore, sadly, they are forcing no alternative to them learning the hard way, which is so often the case in this material realm. However, it really doesn't ultimately have to be this way. Just in the wild chance that what I'm illustrating is correct, wouldn't it just be safer to execute simple regulative principles of religiosity to avoid great distress in the future? This is my appeal. In all actuality, there is no easier process for attaining the Lord's service than the plan recommended in this text. My position is ultimately unwavering. One must give up meat eating to end all suffering and escape the shackles of death. However, if this seems too difficult of a task, take baby steps towards this reality by giving up red meat, especially cows, and be concerned about how the poor creatures being consumed are respected. Find out which day of the year is near Jollicodicee and execute the 1 day a year fast from both food and water. This will lead one to freedom from bondage and suffering. One cannot engage in illicit sex indulgence without putting oneself at great risk of distress and misery. This is a reality that is not at all abstract. If one engages in unrestricted sex indulgence, there are so many distressful conditions to be experienced that are obvious to everyone, such as disease and abortion. Therefore, such behavior must be curbed to obtain spiritual happiness. If this seems like an impossible task, at least understand the negative impact of illicit sex upon one's spiritual life and work in such a manner that one will be elevated to the position of being able to give it up. This can be accomplished by appealing to the Lord for such liberation from bondage. Even better is to act in the spirit of appeal by supporting the work of those who have given up such tendencies, the priestly caste. Executing these simple activities will save one from grave distress in the future. It only makes sense that one take an interest in their own future happiness. And for those that desire to completely end all material distress, in this chapter, I have thoroughly illustrated the process for bringing the mind and the senses under control by understanding the situation through the agency of logic. I strongly encourage all to take this plan of regulation with the utmost seriousness. The only one who has to gain from such action is oneself. This can be compared to cleaning an accumulation of dust from a mirror. If one looks into a dusty mirror, one will not perceive of the actual image in its entirety. As the dust is removed, the image shall gradually come more and more into focus, culminating in a complete understanding of the image upon the complete removal of all dust. This process of regulating the mind and senses through regulative principles is how one attains an accurate perspective of how things are actually situated. And one will not just hear about the truth, one will factually realize it. Therefore, I do recommend one execute the regulated program of religiosity described in this text and factually realize the service of the Lord. This will ultimately lead to one becoming liberated from all distress and misfortune.